Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Adubato. It is absolutely my honor on behalf of everyone at the Caucus Educational Corporation and our partners in public broadcasting to introduce Marie Yovanovitch, who is not just the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, but the author of this book, Lessons from the Edge, a memoir. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be on with you, Steve. Thank you.
I want to just jump right into this because whatever time we have with you, I want to take advantage of. The date back in November the 15th, 2019. You're testifying in the first then President Donald Trump impeachment proceedings inquiry. Did you ever imagine, after 30 years as an ambassador in the State Department, as a diplomat, Foreign Service, that you would be testifying in a presidential inquiry looking to impeach President Trump? You ever imagine that?
How could one? And it's honestly the worst place, a public servant. We are all about serving the public good, the American people. How could I have imagined that I would be caught between, and not just me, I mean, all of the witnesses, between Republicans and Democrats, between an executive branch and a legislature in an impeachment inquiry in advance of presidential elections. I mean, that's not a place that any nonpartisan career public servant wants to be.
As I go back and try to piece this together in preparation for the interview, there are a couple things you said in the book that are important. You said you're an introvert by nature. You're a behind-the-scenes person by nature. You never wanted to be out front. You're doing your job in Ukraine. Why the heck does then President Donald Trump target you, and why does Rudy Giuliani, his attorney at the time, target you, and why does Lev Parnas, who was working with Giuliani and others, and a whole range of other oligarchs, if you will, in Ukraine, why do they target you?
Well, I think I was collateral damage, so to speak. At least from the U.S. point of view, I don't think it was particularly about me, although there were some private interests that were interested in doing sweetheart deals in Ukraine. And if the U.S. government was strong on anti-corruption and kind of holding the line, that would be more difficult. But I think it was corrupt interests in the United States. And by that, I don't necessarily mean money changing hands. I mean people using the public good for their private purposes. So in this case, those around President Donald Trump and then Donald Trump himself, using his office to get information that he thought was available in Ukraine about former Vice President Biden, who he thought would be his main opponent in the next presidential elections, and his son Hunter. And those interests in the U.S. found corrupt interests in Ukraine, who did not like the fact that our policy was to support Ukrainians who wanted to fight corruption. And one of those people was Lutsenko, the prosecutor general. And I think basically the deal was, I want Yovanovitch out of there. And in exchange, I will provide you with what you want on the Bidens. I mean,
dirt on the Bidens. I'm sorry for interrupting, Ambassador. The key was, or what they were looking for was dirt on the Bidens. And as I read the book, and as people listen to your testimony, you were perceived to be in the way.
Mm.
Ambassador, help us understand this. The role of an ambassador. You've argued in the book and said in the book that it's complicated, it's multifaceted, it's not black hats and white hats, good and evil. It's more complicated. The different places that you served as ambassador, clarify that for everyone so that people can understand how you get to the Ukraine.
Yeah, so, I was a Russian speaker from my days in college, and I had spent a year in the Soviet Union as an exchange student. And then I joined the Foreign Service a number of years later. The Soviet Union fell apart. There were all sorts of opportunities there. And so I served in Moscow as a relatively junior officer and in various, in a couple of other places as well. And served in Ukraine as the #2 in the beginning of the 2000s. And then became an ambassador in Kyrgyzstan, one of the former republics of the Soviet Union, then Armenia, and then finally Ukraine in 2016. And so it was, I'm a regional expert, so to speak. And, it's a fascinating area, as we all now know.
And your family history matters here, does it not?
It does. My parents were immigrants to the United States, as am I. They brought me with them. Although I grew up in the United States and was educated here. Each of my parents is half Russian. My father was a Russian speaker. My mother was not. And so I did not grow up speaking Russian. But my parents, having grown up in totalitarian regimes, they understood what it was to be Americans and American citizens, and the privilege it is for us to be living in the United States and to worship as we please, to say what we wanted to say without fear of, being locked up or something like that. And they taught my brother and I that, this was a real privilege and an honor, and that we needed to give back. And so, over time, because everybody, I think, takes detours in their youth. I found my way to the Foreign Service, which was a way of marrying up my passion for history and politics and policy, foreign policy especially, with serving the American people and giving back.
Ambassador, when you were testifying that day in November 2019, what was the main message you wanted to get across to not just the nation, but the world?
Well, primarily, I have to say, I was thinking about a domestic audience. I mean, clearly there were the men and women in front of me in the House of Representatives. I mean, that was one audience. But primarily, I was thinking about the broader audience in America that doesn't often, I think, necessarily think about foreign policy or, what does the State Department do? And I wanted to bring home to Americans what we do as Foreign Service officers, as civil servants in the State Department, what we do to protect and defend the American people every day. On the commercial side, negotiating treaties, trade deals, quotas for, various types of imports and exports, protecting American citizens, safeguarding our political interests and so forth.
Ambassador, I'm sorry for interrupting, but one of the things that really hit me is that while you're testifying, President Trump is tweeting. He's saying a whole range of things about you, all terrible, all negative, all bad. Others are on the internet saying, calling for your assassination. There's a noose waiting for you, a whole range of things that were said about you. Rudy Giuliani involved as well. People go back and read about what was said about you. To what degree, because you said in the book you felt you had to do this. It wasn't even a choice. And as we put up the graphic Democracy at a Crossroads, you write in the book that this has to do with democracy, not only at a crossroads, but beyond that potentially, that our system of small d democratic government is totally at risk. Talk about that. You had to do this.
I felt I had to do this, even though I was, it was a frightening time, frankly. I had already been essentially fired by the president, removed from my post in Ukraine for doing my job. Just to remind your audience, I know you know this, but several weeks before that happened, the State Department had asked me to extend my time in Ukraine by a year, I guess because they thought I was doing an okay job. And then, of course, I was removed because I was perceived to be sort of in the way of other plans. So, then fast forward to the perfect phone call between President Zelensky and former President Trump, which happened in July, but I didn't know about the contents until the end of September.
President Trump called it a perfect call. He kept repeating it was a perfect call, in quotes. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. It was, the transcript was released by the White House at the end of September. And in that, I was shocked to find that two presidents are talking about a mere ambassador. And President Trump says, that woman, and she's going to go through some things. And so for me, it was like, well, what does he mean by that? Because he's already fired me, essentially, right? But, as more and more information was coming out, in part because of investigative journalists such as yourself and others, as more information was being released from the White House and other sources, it just became clear that, I needed to testify, even though I didn't know what kinds of things I was going to, quote, go through. And the reason for that is that although both the White House and the State Department put a lot of pressure on potential witnesses not to testify, this was a constitutional process. Yes, there is a political element to it, but the Congress has a constitutional role to oversee the activity of the executive branch. There were clearly questions here as to what the executive branch did, and they had a right to investigate, and they had a right to call us up. And it felt like I had, if they needed my information, I needed to go forward and provide that information, not as I was a fact witness. I mean, this is what I saw, this is what I know, this is what I can tell you, not as somebody to opine as to whether or not this is.
There was no conjecture. It was fact driven. Could you do this in a minute or left that we have? Ambassador, Ukraine matters because?
Ukraine matters because this is about our national security. It's the right thing to do to support a democracy like Ukraine, whose rights have been violated, their sovereignty, their territorial integrity, their borders. But it is also the smart thing to do because it is about our national security interests. Putin has told us he's going to keep on going if he prevails in Ukraine. We cannot, that will be a place that will be very dangerous for the world and certainly for every American. We will be less free, less prosperous, and less secure.
Ambassador, I thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective. This is the book, Marie Yovanovitch, and it is called Lessons from the Edge, a memoir. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors and also to your family. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
You got it. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by Newark Board of Education, Prudential Financial, New Jersey Institute of Technology, Hackensack Meridian Health, Summit Health, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, PSEG Foundation, Wells Fargo, and by MD Advantage Insurance Company. Promotional support provided by bestofnj.com and by northjersey.com and Local IQ, part of the USA Today Network.